is Aluja. I work for the Friedrich Stiftung as a program coordinator since 22 years now. And we will talk in this panel about something which is evident and something which was mentioned throughout the day today. Almost every panel touched on the issue that we are going to discuss more in length today, in a sense that women are a potential and an asset to peace talks, but there are not so many of them included in the talks. Welcome, Edita. So before we start with our distinguished panelists, and when I say distinguished, really each of them, we have women who have been negotiators, very few, but very strong ones. And we have women who research about the lack of women taking part in negotiations, as Ms. Julia. We have members of government who are trying to set the path for including more women in the peace talks, like Ms. Danidrek. And we have Mr. Lajčák as somebody who is leading a very important process in the EU here. And we will challenge him, of course, to tell us how he is planning to include this potential, this missing potential in the peace talks. When I mentioned, and we have women from civil society who may have not been very directly being part of the negotiations or leading, but they have been a substantial contributor to those processes, like Ms. Sonia Bisenko, and Edita and Monica are like
will leave open the issues. Time to close, really, differences with mutual recognition. It's not only for Kosovo and Serbia, it's also for European Union, so it's also for Balkans, especially in the times when we see that what is happening in our continent and beyond. So,
thank you very much.
I have no more messages for you because Sonia will also share some. Thank you, Salim Denishu.
Thank you very much. I of course share the joy of all of us is to hear such inspiring stories from Monica and Edita, but because of the constraint of the time, we have to move on. So we have covered actually some of the questions that were set in the panel by saying, okay, what women brings. So one of the lessons was like, okay, you need to manage men. Is that the only task of the women bringing in the negotiations? You need to be creative. Second, what else can women bring so that the peace talks are successful? Mr. Lajcak, you have heard few examples, but we have read a lot of studies, and Julia later will tell us of cases. But with all these data there and the examples when women were involved and the peace talks were successful, what is the situation now with the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue? And you, because sometimes Edita talks about women, taking the part, but sometimes men are those who decide the number of seats and the format of the peace talk. So it's okay when you are invited and then you can be strong and creative, but how to secure the place, how to fight for the place. So please tell us, what are you doing in this regard?
Well, thank you very much. I was looking forward to participate in this discussion, but then I realized that it was a trap because you need a man to blame for everything all the men have done in the past. I'm joking, don't worry.
There's an element of truth to it, isn't there?
That's why I'm saying that. But actually, I have come to this discussion not only in my current capacity as the facilitator of the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, but these issues. It's obvious on one hand because obviously women form more than 50% of the society, and whenever there is a conflict, it's 100% of the society which is affected. So then why half of the society should be excluded from coming to peace, negotiating the peace? Then of course such peace cannot sustain, cannot last. It's so simple that it's difficult to understand why it's not happening, but it is still not happening. And even though it's usually the men who are creating the conflict, not the women, and then the women are not asked to participate in this thing, or not allowed. There are very positive examples which we need to learn from. In Colombia, for example, African Union pays enormous attention to these issues. It's good that we have UN Security Council Resolution 1325 because this is the guidance. It has really made a major impact by shaping the mandates of many peace missions ever since it was adopted, and the gender perspective is already there, and it still has to be there because, yeah, the prejudices are there. I mean, I come from Slovakia. Our president is a woman, Zuzana Čaputová. First year in office, whenever she made a public appearance, a statement, people were commenting on what was she wearing, what dress was she wearing, and not what was she saying. I remember when Federica Mogherini was appointed High Representative, she was a mother of 2 young children, and the journalist asked, how are you going to cope your job with raising the kids? And she responded, would you ask the same question if my husband was appointed? So it is still there, but it's obvious to all of you. I dare to say it's obvious to me, but it's not obvious to everyone. And therefore, we really need to raise these issues. We need to make the statements. We have to find for quotas, because I think it's positive. I like initiatives like, for example, saying, I will not participate in panels which consist on men only. And I made this, panels. Yeah, I made this public pledge, and I'm trying to live by it. I was, of course, very strongly influenced about the importance of the issue during my time as the president of the United Nations General Assembly. Of course, at the UN is the flag bearer and the front runner in promoting the role of women, and I mean, it really had an impact on everything I have done during that time and after that. We had my key initiative was it, again, obvious. The women bring a different perspective on the issues that men are not capable of. So we need, then we have much more complex understanding of what, particularly when we speak about, particularly, but when I'm not a practical person, so the women are practical, more practical definitely. So when we speak about issues like access to the food, to the water, about practical aspects of life, then I really appreciate what the role, and I cannot imagine dealing without them. So we need to make the statements. We need to turn these statements into action. We need to connect the dots, which means the negotiators, policymakers, civil societies, parliamentarians, because I see a lot of goodwill, but not much of system. It's the initiative here and there, but it's not really sustained and it's not well coordinated. So I think this is what we need to focus on. And now, in my current capacity, there are two things I can do to strengthen the role of women. One, to appeal to the parties, because I'm not appointing my partners. I'm not deciding who wins the elections in Kosovo and Serbia and who is the chief negotiators. I have Mr. Bislimi, so I work with Mr. Bislimi. But obviously I make the point and I keep repeating. And the second thing I can make is to lead by example. And that's what I'm doing. Look, my delegation, the second row, you see 3 women, 1 man. My team in Brussels, 50% of women. My team in New York, 60% of women. So I don't need to be convinced. I'm happy to take all the collective blame of the mankind. But when it comes to my personal role, I'm trying to be part of the solution, not part of the problem here. Thank you very much.
But as you said, you can lead by example. And sometimes it's different because, yet again, men are leading in the team behind these women. We need to change this a bit more, to have women leading and men being, starting with you. And you, no, not to dismiss, but sometimes, I mean, European Union can impose sometimes things, and you can propose quotas, and you can propose mixed groups, and I think there's a lot of things that we can be done using the directives that already the European Union has, and this 50-50, concept has to start really from the top of the EU institutions, and then it's an example that will be followed. So now from the EU level, we go to the society level, because in Serbia, we have a prime minister, a woman, and we would expect that she would be, like a practical and being involved in negotiations. But as we saw, the negotiations are sometimes asymmetric, because in Kosovo our prime minister is in the other side, and in Serbia is the president in the other side. We should expect, equal representation, but again, we have this situation. But we have strong women in civil society in Serbia, like Sonja Biserko, who are not in the negotiation tables, but are, around and trying to work with women and pressuring the issues and being the sound voice, sometimes even with threats and with the consequence for that, but strong and not resisting. So, Ms. Biserko, what do you think? Because we have talked that it's a clear difference of women being in the pistos, but yet again, how to secure them, how to have them more in our conversations and the processes and the decision making.
Well, I will start with the statement that I have a specific history in the civic society in Serbia, because I came... I would start with, I have a specific history in the civil society of Serbia, because my background is going back to the foreign ministry, from which I resigned in '91 after coming back from Geneva, and I was confronted with this horrible atmosphere, euphoria against everybody in the former Yugoslavia. And it was hard to believe that it will end up in such horrific war. But I'm afraid that at that time, international community was not really paying attention to this media propaganda, which clearly announced what will happen first in Slovenia and Croatia, and then Bosnia and Kosovo. So I joined the anti-war movement, which was not big, but it was, organizing demonstrations every now and then in Belgrade streets. But we also had many anonymous say, anti-war people, especially in Vojvodina, who helped deserters, refugees crossing Serbia, and so on. And from this movement, all these organizations emerged, women organizations who dealt with women issues, then Humanitarian Law Fund, which dealt with the crimes, Helsinki Committee, and many others. So, and they were mostly composed of women, and they were mostly the leaders of these organizations. And I think Milosevic was really concerned about our activities in reaching out to international community. And at that time, because of this enormous frustration which we all had, I was writing letters to everybody in the international community, Lord Dolven, whoever, and I was closely working with Mazowiecki until his resignation. But I would like to tell you something about my history with Kosovo, because it started in 1993 when I first came here. And since then, I was personally, and my organization as well, fully engaged in dialogue with Kosovo Albanians. And the first dialogue took place in Ulcin, and it was the first dialogue in the country, because all other meetings were happening in New York, Greece, Thessaloniki, I don't know, elsewhere in the world. So this was the first meeting, and the Machi came to my office and said, "Sister, you have to organize it." So we first started the organization in Pea, but 3 days before the conference took place, they canceled the meeting, so we moved to Ulcin, and we had to prepare everything in 3 days. So it was the first meeting of Albanians and Serbs, all kinds of profiles, politicians, NGOs, academic people, and so on. And it was really very touching. I'm sorry we didn't have then the mobiles to film that, but anyway, we published a book which reflects the atmosphere and this goodwill at this meeting. And the next dialogue took place in Belgrade, in Hotel Hyatt, which was led by Tekmi Agani, who brought 40 Albanians. Only Rugova didn't come, so it was a big conference. We also invited people from SPS, but they didn't come. But two men from my former colleagues turned up just to spy what we are doing, and they told me, "Don't tell anybody that we are here." I said, "But this is our conference, what are you talking about?" But anyway, I remember the sentence which Tekmi Agani said at that time. He said, "Let's try once again." It was 22nd November, and after that you have Rambuje and then intervention. And immediately after the intervention, we organized a meeting of young people in Ohrid, Albanians and Serbs. And you would be surprised how touching it was. There was a lot of emotion. It was in the autumn, in the fall, and intervention ended up in May. So, and after a few days, you couldn't say who was who. And we continued with that for several times. And then also we had one conference in Grand Hotel. I again brought about 50 people from Belgrade, politicians, historians, and all kinds of people. We were not aware that it was transmitted directly. So in the evening, when we went around the city, everybody was greeting us and, offering us drinks and so on. It was so, you can see that by these few events that we have organized, that there was a reception in Kosovo, and that they were open for any kind of constructive dialogue and so on, despite all that they went through over the previous decade. So, and many other things we did. We also organized monitoring of human rights of Serbs in enclaves. We made about 3 reports. The last one was 3 years ago, and we learned that there is some kind of communication between Albanians and Serbs that nobody wants to report about it. There is a human dimension to all this which is not seen, it's not visible. And I think it's unfortunate that journalists are not going into such stories, because they do exist. And we also, through the regional women body, had a lot of activities between women in the north of Kosovo and throughout the Kosovo, Serb women and Albanian women. It was always, how should they, friendly, open, and we have good contacts with them. It's not used in the political life, unfortunately. And this also shows how people from the civic society can contribute if you have a partner in the political life. It's our organization in Belgrade. We usually did cooperate with some people from Civic Alliance, Vesna Pešić in the first place, and later on with LDP, Čedo Jovanović, but he's a disappointing figure, unfortunately, but also with some women in the Democratic Party. So we would give them our reports and, things that we have done in the field. And I think it's very important to know the roots of the conflict, the the stereotypes that are existing. And this is all that we try to sort of bring up for people to understand why something is going on. And in this peace process, negotiating process is hardly, how should I say, open for women. But the peace building is something that women can contribute a lot because it very much depends. A lot of burden is of women. They're more open to communicate with the other side. We have the example of women in Bosnia, for example. Women in black, they are regularly communicating with Srebrenica women who are really heroes. And they kept up Srebrenica massacre, genocide alive until today. And they are responsible for it becoming a moral, issue for the whole world.
Do you see a
from
hope
Srebrenica.
in today's time if women from civil society in Serbia could help the peace process? Do you see that there is any
this
movement?
is something that exists, but this government, which came into power in 2012, in a way marginalized civil society, or some of them brought on his side, but apparently they wasted these organizations in a way. But I would say that what we did over the last few years, especially my organizations, we were really engaged in monitoring minorities, especially Albanians in the south and Sanjak, Bošnjak, because they're really still considered to be, Islamic terrorist inclined population, which is really a stereotype which has nothing to do with reality. So we are constantly reminding the government, but also international community in Belgrade and more widely, what is going on in the society, which is not seen when you come, because foreigners are mostly focused on the government and what it does with, in this case, with Pristina. Our president at the beginning signed this Brussels agreement, which was promising, and all these agreements that are signed are good, but they are not implemented. Later on, he lost the interest because they started to negotiate partition, and last 5 or 6 years they lost. So we are now again at the very beginning, and we don't know how it will finish, but this new geostrategic change, which is going on for some time, but Ukraine war has really highlighted that there are profound changes in this security framework. And I hope that US and EU will now finally solve this issue, because it seems as if they seem to be, finally decided to put an end to Kosovo issue, which should also liberate Serbia. And its agony about whether they will become the Serbian world here and there, because this is really what is blocking Serbian progress. It's a kind of program that foreigners hardly believe that it exists. And you very often, you would call me a radical because you were reminding them that Serbian nationalism has survived and that it's still very active in hoping to get away with this Serbian world, which is now called as the Russian world 3 years ago or something like that. They wouldn't believe us because they were, speaking with those people who convinced them that, they're interested for the EU, which they are not, in fact. And this is a big lie, I would say. Serbia wants to have this support and respect from the West, but doesn't really share these values. And I think it will take a long time before the society is going to be prepared to embrace these values. And I think this coalition or the alliance with Russia, we can put it in the short sentence, they're against Western nowadays values. I mean, this is the main, common denominator between Russia and Serbia. Now you can go into explanation whether it's orthodoxy, this and that. I mean, there are many arguments for that. But, I mean, in short, it is really rejecting the Western values, the rule of law, pluralism, and so on. So now we are at this at the point where we have to decide, and, President Vučić is not an easy situation, but he deserves it, because he is telling privately in Brussels that he's aware that Kosovo should be recognized. But once he comes home, he says, I will never give up Kosovo, it's our state, and all that. And, he's for the first time telling publicly what he is asked to do because he wants to share the responsibility with all of us and put the blame on America, on EU, and so on, because it's Western, how should I say, conspiracy against Serbia. They want to prevent Serbia being a major state in the Balkans, and so all these sort of stories which circulate all these years. But anyway, I'm glad that we have come to the point that it seems that Mr. Lajčák will be successful.
Thank you very much, Sonia, for being always such a sound voice in a situation in Serbia when you say it's not listening, and often this happens to women when they want to contribute in peace talks. One of the barriers is like the devaluation of the woman's opinion, as if they don't have something wise to say in the process. So I hope that there will be some sound listening to you and your organization. Yes, but let's move on. Let's move on a bit out of our region, and we have Ms. Danidrek from a very far region. I know I said that I leave you in the last, but I want to connect it because then Julia from the research, let's say, perspective will tell us what is happening actually. But you heard all this about what's happening in the region, in Europe, and so on. We don't know so much about the conflict in the parts of the country where you come from, but you are in the government and there are certain conflicts there, and you are responsible to, let's say, if not lead them as Ms. McWilliams and Edita, at least to prepare the background for those peace talks. And you are a woman yourself, but are there any other women in the process and you think that they can contribute to successful resolution?
Okay. It's time to say good evening. I'm so delighted to be part of this panel, even though I'm not on the negotiation table. But I work in the field of conflict resolution in the southern part of Thailand. Let me be brief about the situation. Thailand is not in war situation. We have conflict. It's political and ethno conflict. Back started about 100 years ago. The region, the southern border part of Thailand, this region is adjacent to Malaysia. It was the Muslim Malay kingdom at that time, but it was annexed to Thailand 100 years ago. So the feeling of losing their identity, their sovereignty caused the conflict in the Malay population. And we had the Thai government 50 years ago made a big mistake that we implemented an ultra-nationalist policy. We abandoned the Muslim schools. We suppressed the identity of the local people. And now we are amending the past. We are implementing a lot of development projects in the area, covering economic, social, and promoting multiculturalism. However, the situation of violence still persists, but it's improving. We had the worst time of insurgency in 2004 because we used heavy-handed approach to solve the problem. And it proved a big failure. So the following government, we changed the course to more development-focused approach. Now we also have peace talk dialogue. We don't call negotiation because we don't know exactly who are we talking to. In the South, the movement of insurgency are so fragmented. There are several groups. We are talking to the most influential group, but after 8 years of peace talk, we have moderate progress. It had been put into halt several times because at the time we almost reached the truce, 40 days or 50 days of ceasefire. Another group of insurgents staged fire. They set the bomb, roadside bombs like that. So the talk was interrupted. But what I would like to tell you here is that the situation in Thailand is far from other countries. As we're not in war situation, so the peace talk is not for stop further war. Yeah, our peace talk is to prevent the escalation of violence. So the approach is different. And when you consider the difficulty in making the peace talk, as we don't know who are we talking to, the, the resistant groups are so fragmented and disunity. So it's important to find the final agreement. So we move to another track. The government is focusing on development projects. We allocated lots of money into this region. And we pay attention to the role of women. Empowering women is in our national agenda. And under this national agenda, we have a strategic plan for promoting women in peace and security. And we have a special center to coordinate working with women civil society. So even though in the dialogue panel, we don't have gender quota, we have women in that panel, but it's by her position. And if that woman is promoted to other position, then we might have a guy replace her. See, this is a remark. But without the gender quota, we still working closely with the civil society under the Center of Women and Children. We open space for over 50 civil society to work with the government agency. We hear their voice. We allow them to develop the women's strategic plan with the government officers. We have female rangers who work closely with the local people. These female rangers, they're not working at the front line, but they live in the community and they can bridge the local people with the army. They're doing some kind of training in occupation to allow the local people, female citizens, to have more money to their household. And we, under the empowering women, the definition of security in the region, when we ask about what is their concern under security definition, their definition is day-to-day security. The pressing issue is domestic violence, not violence on the street like that. And this is the issue that men alone cannot solve. Women have to come in. And Malay Muslim women in this region, when they face domestic violence, they cannot get out of their marriage because of the religion. The imam is the only one who can judge, right? And the government was so afraid to make intervention because it's a religious, it's an ethnic issue. But the women want us to have intervention. So the solution is that the wife of imam set a center to help the woman in the village do some reconciliation and talk to her husband that this case you must allow women to get divorced. So this is the role of women in Thailand that important to peace building. And myself as the government representative for problem resolution, I found it important to have more women in the field. We cannot achieve trust and collaboration if the local people don't talk to us openly. And the way we communicate with people, the feminine attributes inside us, is the quality that work under peace and collaboration very well. The first time I talked to the local people, and I know that they don't trust the government, I bought them lipsticks. And they are happy. I mean, the way the style, the working style of women and men is different. When my male colleague visit the local, when I asked the local, what's the difference between male officers and female officers, they said they feel more, they feel at ease talking to women. they talk to me openly. They complain what the government did, and they give me true information, and that is very valuable for me and for the government to come back and reconsider what they have done and for the future project. So I think not only the female perspective that can bring to the peace and security,
The inner security in your case.
Yeah, our attributes. It's important to work in the field that require trust and collaboration.
Thank you very much, Ms. Beck, for this far side explaining us different contexts of, let's say, inner peace and security within the country, not necessarily between the countries. And as we are coming to the final round, and we have then about 20 minutes for questions from the audience for all of you, because I have allowed to have a lengthy introduction for all the members of the panels. I am with Julia. Julia Schmidt is a young researcher who was 12 years ago intern in our Friedrich Ebert Stiftung office in Pristina, and she was doing a master's in Uppsala about the women, peace and security, but now she leads the Helmut Schmidt Foundation, and she's involved in research about this topic, and she will bring us also maybe something as a perspective of different regions in the world, but also maybe a solution how to diminish the gap of less women in peace talks processes.
Thank you, Besa. Let me first say that I think you've given me the most difficult job of the panel because, you know, as a peace and conflict researcher, I've been studying for 10 years how we can end armed conflicts and how we can build sustainable peace. And now after hearing all these really inspiring personal accounts also of women who've actually done it and worked in this, I sort of have to take you back to the boring statistics that Besa started with in this panel, but I'll try to keep it brief. From the many really important questions that this panel poses, I want to pick up two. And the first question that I want to address is why are there actually not more women in peace negotiations around the world? And I think we've already heard a couple of answers to this question. And as a researcher, I would like to add 2 points to this. And the first one is because it's not an even playing field. Because how can it be? If political institutions, if political processes, if political systems are built by men, for men, have for hundreds of years only been open to men and are still dominated by men, they favor masculine traits of masculinity and they prioritize masculine behavior. So it's not an even playing field for women to enter politics. And the second answer I want to give to the question is it's also because women who do break glass ceilings and who become ministers and who become presidents and prime ministers and so on are still regularly belittled and patronized in our society. We heard the story of the Slovakian president who, it doesn't matter what she says, you know, we're only talking about her appearance. I come from Germany, where we now have, for the first time in our history, a female foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock. And she was only she assumed office, and a few months into her term, she visited the front lines in Ukraine earlier this year. And immediately afterwards, a very famous male journalist on morning TV commented on her that she is a young lady who sort of looks out of place. And if I may add this personal comment, as a woman in her 30s who's still really looking for female role models of leadership, I find this incredibly off-putting and frustrating. The second question that I would like to address is the question, well, why does it matter? Why does it matter if women join peace negotiations to peace agreements as mediators, as negotiators, as signatories? And as a peace and conflict researcher, I would say we have two main answers to the question. And the first answer is that if women participate in peace negotiations, they increase the quality of peace for everyone in society.
And the last thing, implementation.
And exactly. And this is because women and girls experience war differently than men and boys. And so if they join negotiations, they broaden the perspectives and they broaden the agenda and they broaden the possible solutions that are on the table.
we've actually, as researchers, we like to compare. And for a while now, we've been comparing how peace agreements look like if they were negotiated only by men, or if they were negotiated with at least one woman at the table. And we find that there actually is a difference, that peace agreements that are negotiated with women at the table are more likely to include political and social provisions that go away from the elite level. So they are more likely to include transitional justice provisions, provisions covering human rights. And these issues ultimately help societies recover from war as a whole, and they make the peace that comes afterwards more just and inclusive for everyone. And the final answer to the question, and that's my last point, why is it important that women are included in peace negotiations? Besa gave you a lot of numbers in her introduction, and I want to give you another one, and the number is 15. Since 1989, since the end of the Cold War, only 15% of peace agreement texts have mentioned women. To turn it around, 85% of peace agreements and ceasefire agreements that have been signed in the last 30 years do not even acknowledge half of the population that is affected by war. And it's important that they do. And once women join negotiations, we see that the likelihood of gender-specific languages and gender-specific provisions and terminology will be adopted, that this increases. And this is important, first, because war is a social rupture, right? We've heard this morning. War changes the roles that women have in society. War changes gender roles. And it also often increases women's political mobilization. And so post-conflict peace processes and negotiations cannot go backwards, but have to move forwards. And we cannot go back to sort of a gender-based normality from before the war, but it has to be a new one. And the second reason for why it is important to have gender-sensitive terminology and provisions in peace agreements is, and this goes back to something that's been quoted again and again in this conference, to what Madeleine Albright says, that societies that have an increased level of gender equality are more peaceful, are more stable, and are more democratic. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is a fantastic, let's say, conclusion of the panel's input so far, because we heard lots of different experiences and lots of tips for the other generations what to do. I thank you very much for the first round, but I would have no questions anymore from my side, because you have covered all the questions I had for the panel, maybe because also we discussed and we organized among ourselves also how to do it, but also because of your great experience in these processes, and thank you very much for your honest and sincerity. I open up now the panel for the time that is left, and we were trying to be as accurate as the agenda was given to us. We have time until 6 o'clock, 6:05, we can add because we lost the 5 minutes until we started, for questions from the audience to the members of the panel.
Do të flas në shqip, bis? Po. Faleminderit shumë. Jam Luljeta Demolli prej Qendrës Kosovare për Studime Gjinore. Disa letra I kemi dërgu te zotri Lajçak për përfshirjen më të madhe të grave në procesin e negociatave dhe marrëveshjes. Ju falenderoj shumë për panelin, sepse
I kanë panelin, por audienca nuk I kanë pajisjet e përtim. You can have the equipments because the translators are translating, but we would need like 1 second to get that. There. Reyes. Show your hand.
Nobody else has. It's like someone can translate.
Yes. Sorry for this. Manzere cu facturi cu scali. So you can just start from the beginning, but short.
Faleminderit shumë. U prezentova me siguri e dallun, është një panel të i rëndësishëm, edhe është një ndër panelet kryesore dhe është kënaqësi me i pa zonjat edhe është kënaqësi po ashtu zotri Lajçakun. Kemi dërgu si organizata prej Kosovës disa letra për të kërku që kur të vjen Kosovë t'i takoj gratë, sepse organizatat e grave që janë aktive, jo shoqërinë civile, nuk na ka vizitu asnjëherë. Jemi disa organizata që kërkojmë që të përfshihen gratë më shumë në dialog dhe herën tjetër kur të vjen Kosovë, do të dëshironim ta takonim pak më shumë organizata sepse nuk janë të gjitha këto. Një pyetje pak provokative, por me kuptu pak ma shumë, a është drafti asociacionit në aspektin e perspektivës gjinore, është mjaftu shumë, sepse nuk e kemi pa çka do të na thonin, është fjala për zotrin Lajçakun.
I will collect a few questions and then we will distribute them among the panel, whoever feels ready to answer. Another one?
Well, actually, it's an example that as UN Women, led by Flora, because here I'm also with the former head of office, who is one of the pioneers and the strongest WPS agenda leaders. I will give you an example, and I would really like to know if you plan consultations like this. So we were working a lot in localization of the peace process when Edita was leading the dialogue. What is localization? And I think Sonia briefly explained, with Regional Women's Lobby, meeting with women from Serbian community in the north and south, bringing them together and see their views, their needs in practical, how everything impacts their life. And of course, Edita would convey those messages or their needs at the higher level. So, and this is why the gender perspective actually is important, because women need to see what, or to know what is going on up there, but also the people who lead the process should inform women and men and children, I mean the girls, what are there in the table. And this is including the association. So is there a plan to localize a bit this dialogue? Because apparently people feel like they're not informed at all. Not only women, but even citizens. So there are people living in municipalities. Me and Flora, we live in Čaglavica, for example. We have a very normal life with the Serbian community, but we are not aware of what's happening in Brussels, you know? Thank you.
Thank you, Flora. Another question from between
Hi, I don't really know how to phrase it. I guess I'm just curious what the difference you see between men and women, what the different perspective is that they bring to the table. We're always talking about bringing the women perspective versus the male perspective, but what exactly are those differences? Is it systems thinking versus compartmentalization or vice versa? Just, I'd like to know about that.
And the last one, for the panel. If not, then we have more time.
Fast to explain. So, maybe we start from the last question. Maybe Monica can help us with the experience, because we were actually, the task of the panel was to answer exactly that. What is this insightful added value that women bring when they become part of the panel, of the peace process?
First, I'm completely shocked to hear that you're not having a localized information coming to you. You can't have a successful process. That's what inclusion means. An inclusive process means bottom up, top down, top down, bottom up. And you know, we have this, they intellectualize it by calling it track 1, track 2, track 3. In Interpeace, which I chaired in Geneva for 8 years, if you add 3 plus 2 plus 1, it makes 8. And you cannot possibly have a decent peace process, and in fact it's peace processes. There are multiple peace processes going on at the same time. And so start thinking about track 8. Because that, as Anita says, is where some creativity comes from, where the curiosity comes from, where you're having to survive by doing those negotiations at local level. That's what I find everywhere, in Syria, Colombia, and whatever. And what they did in Colombia, when they went to Cuba, to Havana, the Norwegians and the FARC, the guerrilla group movement who were at the table, and the Colombian government, I met them all. And they had looked at what we had done in Northern Ireland. I couldn't believe that they had studied our situation, and they were writing to us. And that what they did was they invited submissions. They invited them and formed a gender committee. And they brought in all the submissions, and they got 3,000 submissions from the people, because it's a big country. And they worked through them and saw the proposals. That was how they got from Cuba to Colombia, because it was in another country. But it is absolutely important for envoys, for chairpersons, for commissioners. I'm a commissioner to disband armed groups. Do you think for 1 minute that I would be successful if I didn't do what you're doing, which is going into the localities? It is the only way that you will get the work done. They give you the best information. They are the early warning system. They know what's coming tomorrow, when you might only hear about it, you know, in a month's time when it's too late. They are the preventative mechanisms. That's why you have to have hubs, like Boyd is talking about creating a hub, where bringing the different groups together to dialogue. Sometimes it's done through culture and arts, but sometimes it's straight politics. And nothing is not on the table. Everything's on the table. Which brings me to your question. I don't know how you're still asking that question after all these years. Haven't we proved ourselves by now that we do both? We work on gender justice because there are things that happen to us that don't happen to men. And I give this example all the time. When I was the Chief Commissioner of Human Rights, I had the power to take the Minister of Health to court and say, why are you not giving breast cancer women the drug for remission that will save their lives? I won the case. He met me in the door of the court and said, I'm not going to fight this. It is an Article 2 right under the European Convention. And you're right. So he brought in the drug. 10 years later, I got a cancer, and it saved my life. I give that example. If a man had been the Chief Commissioner, would he have taken that case? So it's just one tiny example, but that is not what we did at the table. We connected, and I think you're from the security sector, so we connected the security issue with the safety issues. There is terrorist violence. That's what women feel when they're subjected to domestic violence. The terrorist is living inside their home. So I used to raise my arm at the table and say, okay, let's talk about the weapons, decommissioning of weapons, disarming the groups. I said, not all arms are imported. This arm can do as much damage as actually some of the weapons that I'm threatened with. So change the mindset, decommissioning the mindset. We connected all the kinds of things that happen to women, also to the bigger issues. What if we release prisoners? And by the way, the interesting thing that women put on the table, they say, those are soft things. Integrated education, shared housing, resources for young people. We had a civic forum to bring civil society to sit alongside the representative elected people, because the elected people were constantly fighting. And we said we need to have culture, social and economic issues also discussed by the faith leaders, by the disability sector, by the young people's sector, by the women's sector, and have them in parallel. So my message was inclusive process, comprehensive agenda. I did not, as a peace negotiator, sit and say, I'll sit here now for 2 years and wait till they get to the women's issues, and then I'll speak. Every single issue is a women's issue. Every single piece of our lives is political. When we put education on the table, they said, what had that to do with the war? It has everything to do with the peace. And everything else we put in the section on reconciliation. The armed groups came to us and said, because we fought the war, I don't think we'll be able to write very much about victims. I said, that's a disgrace, but we will do it. And we did it. And it came in at the very last minute, which shocked me. How could you sit negotiating peace and ask to go to the people? And they'll turn around and say, you've completely reformed the police and the army, you've demobilised, you've disarmed, you're letting prisoners out, you've set a target to let prisoners out, you've got a timetable. And yet when we wrote these other things for victims, for the representation of women, we don't need affirmative action. We don't need timetables, we don't need targets. And we said, yes, we do, because political will not bring it by itself. So my answer to you is, everything is political and women work on everything. Everything is political. That's why we're tired. That's why we're weary, because we work on everything. And then there is gender justice. If you know anything in the Balkans about that, you're the experts. And that's why we also have to be at the table. War is the face of a woman, and there are things that are done to us that we can only speak about. And they're often stigmatized and we're often shamed. But now we have a voice and we will speak about them. That's also the reasons. So it's for both reasons. That it's not just that they are there for the value because they're women. They are there because they have a gender perspective, a lens on all of the other issues. And that comes from the work you're doing in the locality. There was a middle question, but because I didn't have a pen, I can't remember what it was, and someone else will answer it.
No, I think you covered both the locality and the difference. Thank you for that. And I think that the direct proposal to Mr. Lajčák from Julieta, this can not commented, but implemented hopefully in the next, you are here, or if you were going to stay.
Of course, yes. I'm gladly accepting your invitation. I think we already tried to reach out. It did not work. We exchanged a couple of letters, and my people, Chris and Miranda, will make sure the next time I'm here we will meet. Every time when I visit Kosovo, I try to reach out beyond my direct interlocutors, who are the Prime Minister and First Deputy Prime Minister and Chief Negotiator. I'm meeting regularly with parliamentarians, with media, with civil society, with local administration, with people dealing with missing persons. So it's all there. At the same time, again, let me also be clear that what we expect from the two parties, from Kosovo and Serbia delegation, is of course to communicate with their citizens, to prepare the population for the deal, because this is not something that can be agreed and adopted at the level of government and parliament. It really has to, we need to have a societal consensus around the deal, and this is also the responsibility of those who represent you in the process. It's not only about coming to Brussels, talking to me, talking to Serbia, it's also about establishing a system that will keep all the segments of the society informed. I represent the European Union, and so to say, my constituency is the member states. They need to be informed. International organizations, our key partners, United States, United Kingdom, which I'm trying to do, and I'm also reaching out. I met with civil society also in Serbia several times. As I said, it's all... Well, Sonia, you know, I know you for so many years. I respect you. I love you. I don't need to convince you. You are the last person who needs to be convinced. I'm talking to others who need to understand. Where are we? So that's why it's really important that this internal aspect of communication on the dialogue is equally seriously taken by those who have the mandate to represent Kosovo as the external one. And you have full right to request from the chief negotiator, from the prime minister, to come and to inform and to make sure that it is a societal issue.
I mean, you could lead by being even more transparent from that side of the level, and then also then they will follow.
That's what I'm trying to do. But also, my day also only has 24 hours in my week, 7 days, so I'm trying to do as much as I can.
Lots of tips.
Are Albania with the south of Serbia going to be part of this dialogue? Because they are also hostages of this unfinished business in Kosovo, you know that. They equal position in Serbian community with all. So I think we should, we wrote a very big report on that, and you know about the problem of passivization, which is now reflected in the census process because they're rejected by system. So those who are passivized don't exist anymore. So I think this is the issue. We wrote a statement that I sent it to you. So, okay, but I think this is something that you have to bring up. Yeah.
And to answer your question, we are happy to put on the agenda any issue that the parties are willing to discuss. So it's really, we,
you are inviting for
it's,
submission of issues also by the
look,
side.
we always say it's the parties, it's Kosovo and Serbia who own the dialogue. And they decide on the speed, they decide on the final outcome. We are here to facilitate, and we are here to make sure that whatever is agreed brings Kosovo and Serbia closer to the European Union and is built on European standards. So we are not moving away from the European Union. But we are not here to impose or to force. You must be ready for that, both parties, and we are trying to cultivate that. And when the parties are ready to discuss about an issue, we will put it on the agenda.
Can I ask a question? But it's easy to say sometimes we're not here to impose, but sometimes you have to take a risk. When the parties are in stalemate, sometimes they just park it and walk away, they adjourn it, they're in a tantrum, they leave it to you. And so recently, and I've been watching this in the Brexit negotiations, that the British Secretary of State took a risk because he said he was only mediating between both sides, but he actually called them out. I know that's hard for you to do, but I think in our situation, the Senator Chairman was in the United States Chairperson, Senator Mitchell. There were times when he had to call it out. You know, he set a deadline. Maybe you don't. We all know that deadlines need to be flexible, but sometimes he took a risk, and he said, you know, this could go on forever. And what happens is people's hopes dry up, people's expectations get lowered, and you could be there in another 10 years' time. So you know, I know it's very difficult for you as an envoy to think about that, but this is where you will learn from the localities also, the kind of risks that they are also taking, and they can feed in what we did and what the chairperson of our talks did, and it was a woman who was his chief of staff. She actually formed a team that went out and did this work on the ground, and she fed the ideas back, and so did we. We were the Women's Coalition. And the chairperson said, I hadn't thought of that, that I'm going to try that tomorrow. Or he set us some homework by asking us questions. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? Or setting down options. Those are the things that Adita was talking about in terms of creativity. We desperately need to think outside the box. Otherwise, we're going to have real danger on our hands in terms of all these conflicts that you're facing here in the Balkans. So that's a very big question. And I know that you're probably already thinking that you're taking risks, and if you take too many, they'll throw you out. But the EU did win the Nobel Peace Prize, and it didn't win it for nothing.
I just would like to continue.
Just if I may.
Before you continue, because it relates to you.
Okay.
First, about legitimizing the peace process. Please be informed. Kosovo is in the zero transparency for the dialogue in Brussels because of the closeness of our Prime Minister, who had the legacy of being so much against in this dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia. Now he seems to have big difficulties to share at least what is possible. We all know as negotiators, so it's not possible 100% transparency, but it's impossible 0% transparency. And this is not only my opinion. You should be concerned as EU, because you need legitimacy. That outcome is for whom is for Kosovo people, for Serbian people, isn't it? I'm glad Flora mentioned localizing in that time, how we work, not only general public, even deep to the local level. But now, really, this situation should concern you as mediator of sure. moment you can come to the situation, you may come to some blueprint, but who's going to support? Who's going to support? This paper which is now circulating, nobody is even trying officially to say a word. So please take it as very kind of takeaway, given my experience, not only in Brasova, but from the Rambouillet. In that time of Rambouillet, of occupation, we legitimized. We came from Rambouillet, met university students everywhere in Kosovo to internalize. It's very important. Second, there was a question about what is difference between women and men peace negotiated. My belief, the woman's perspective for peace is different from men. Usually men are in the table as fighters, and men's definition of peace is mostly end of violence, but women look at peace as a broader sense where people's need should be addressed by the peace agreement. So this is a big value that woman brings into the table, because if you address needs of citizens, you are coming to the terms of sustainability of that agreement. Another point.
We have one more.
Please let not happen that peace agreements do not have gender provisions, because if we are not there in the table, and if we are not in that papers, implementation is without us. Who is going to these local levels? Who has more access to people's needs and pains? And choose women. So we are not a threat. We are an opportunity for our societies and for institutions, say it nationally or internationally. So take the woman as strategic asset, as an opportunity.
Very
Thank
much,
you.
Edita. And because you also mentioned yourself how brave Ms. Lajcak was to come at this very brave panel, I'm going to give the last floor to him, just shortly, because we are now concluding the panel.
At the moment when I was appointed, the dialogue already had 10 years of history, and the reason why I was appointed was exactly that we don't want this to drag on for another 10 years. I'm the first full-time negotiator, exactly with the aim to bring this to an end. So that's one thing. So I'm responsible for this 24/7, which was not the case in last 10 years. That's point number one. Point number two, I also dare to say that the process has never been as transparent as it is since I have been appointed. At the same time, you are all negotiators, and you know how sensitive but important it is to find the right balance between the transparency of the process and confidentiality of talks. And my third point is that I'm happy to come whoever wants to see me, and please invite me. Chris is here in Pristina, my representative. But at the same time, you cannot complain to me that your government is not talking to you. I mean, you have means to demand this also from the people you elected to their offices. Thank you.
Another panel only for that. Well, thank you very much. I think thank you very much all. I think what we will bring from this panel is women make the difference, so please take them on board, and also consult them. If you are not with them on board, at least consult them in other ways that we can do. Thank you all for your attention. Yeah.